Can you talk to us a little bit about that process, the you know, all the applicants, how it worked, how Christa McAuliffe sort of got involved and how, how she was picked and then what she then went through in between getting picked and getting on the Challenger?
Well, they had what was essentially a sort of nationwide talent contest. And Christa McAuliffe was chosen from about 11,000 applicants, teachers from all over the United States and its dependent territories. Um, and the way that it worked was each state was responsible for putting forward their own candidates. So they were interviewed at a state level and then went forward to a further selection process. And then once they'd winnowed it down to a certain point, those finalists were then sent to Houston to be subjected to interviews by NASA officials and a physical, although nothing like the physicals that like the Mercury astronauts in the 50s and 60s were subjected to. But so they went through this testing process, and then the finalists from that group went to Washington D.C. for final selection.
And then they picked her, although, you point out that she even felt during that process, I think she called her husband like, I'm not getting this. This is the people
well, yeah,
here
she
are
did,
amazing.
because she didn't feel that she was NASA material, because some of the other applicants had done these kind of amazing physical feats, like climb mountains and sailed across oceans, and and she convinced herself in advance that she simply wasn't remarkable enough. But really, part of the reason I think that they picked her in the end is because she seemed both ordinary in a way that people could identify with, but she was also a fantastic communicator. She was extremely charismatic, and she could, and talk to anybody. And you see her go on like the Tonight Show, and she's just kind of, she beams out of the television screen when you're watching it, and charm Johnny Carson, and kind of sells the space program and the idea of flying on the shuttle, extremely vividly in the 10 minutes that she's on. So it was partly that what she perceived to be her own ordinariness was something that was very attractive about her as a candidate, I think.
And she was going to be then becoming, after they had come back, was going to be an ambassador to NASA and be going around and report. I mean, I think they had plans for her to really continue with that, communication, and that's her real superpower.
That was the idea, is that they signed an agreement. She and her backup, because they had to select a backup who would take her place if she fell ill on the eve of launch or something. Barbara Morgan, who was an elementary school teacher from Idaho, the two of them went into training with the shuttle crew in Houston after their selection. And the idea was that for the year after they returned to Earth at the end of the select teacher and the crew returned to Earth at the end of the mission, then the teacher would spend a year on the road going around the country talking about NASA and the space shuttle program.
And then I was fascinated that Morgan then later in life, or soon after, I don't know how long, quit her job and then went through actual astronaut training, right?
Barbara Morgan did two interesting things in the immediate aftermath of the accident. One, that she and her husband Clay, who up to that point had decided not to have children, decided that was a mistake and that they should have kids. So they did that. And then eventually, not that long after the accident, Morgan quit her job as a school teacher, moved to Houston, and enrolled in full-time astronaut training to become not a teacher in space, but a fully qualified astronaut. And she eventually flew a shuttle mission.
That's incredible. That's I mean, that is a heroic thing in and of itself. Most people, I think, would kind of go the other way. They saw what happened and go like, all right, well, wasn't meant to be. No, thank you. But that's
not only, did she witness the Challenger accident live from the ground at Cape Canaveral, but she was also following in a chase plane during the Columbia disaster in 2003.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
So the
Wow.
fact that she, remained committed to the program and went into space herself after that is really extraordinary.
Yeah. But it's also, you look at the type of people each of these astronauts. Well, you tell me, what are the through lines in terms of the types of people? Obviously, they came from various backgrounds and had various histories. What are their commonalities as people?
I would say that generally speaking, they're people that all really knew what they wanted to do very early on. These are not people who kind of spend their teens and 20s traveling around the world doing this and that, getting jobs in bars in European capitals. And then, they go into further education, or they go into the armed forces, or they go into, everybody on the Challenger crew knew exactly what they wanted to do. They're extremely dedicated, extraordinary individuals. And I would say that the one thing that marks out the people that NASA selected to be the first shuttle crews with the astronaut intake in 1978 from the astronauts who flew in the Mercury and Gemini and Apollo missions, is that obviously all of the latter group were white male fighter pilots, basically. So they were all almost exactly the same, had almost exactly the same backgrounds. But many of them were also, these maverick types, because a lot of them were fighter pilots who NASA discovered they couldn't always be relied upon to do what they were told, because they wanted to do things their way. Which, if you read The Right Stuff, it's full of these stories of these guys kind of bucking the rules and doing stuff that they thought they should do, like, playing golf on the moon. Or Ron Young took sandwiches into orbit on one of his first flights into space, which turned out to be a disaster because the crumbs apparently got everywhere. So NASA kind of learned their lesson with the astronauts that they selected in all of those earlier programs. And so when it came to the shuttle astronauts, they didn't want any of those people. They didn't want lone wolf types. They didn't want mavericks. What they wanted was team players, and they wanted people who demonstrated a broad range of interest in various different disciplines, not people who are monomaniacal about flying planes or geology or whatever it was. So what a lot of them have in common is, Judy Resnick, who was on the Challenger crew, was an electrical engineer, but she was also an extremely gifted classical pianist. Ron McNair, he had a doctorate in laser physics from MIT, but he was also a really good jazz saxophonist and a black belt in karate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and all of those guys had these kind of extraordinary range of gifts that just makes you think that they're not like real, they're not normal human beings. So I would say if there was a type, it's, that's the type. They're kind of, they're not like other people.
Yeah. And obviously a level of bravery or being, or I don't know if it's obliviousness or, how we talk about, to allow themselves to be shot into space is an amazing thing. And you have to be incredibly brave
really
at the very least.
Yeah. Because I was actually at a dinner the other night where